This is a pair of KEF Cresta speakers from 1971. They're a beautiful example of mid-century modern design and they sound really nice. But this particular pair is different from most Crestas from this era and kind of weird. Stick around, I'm going to show you why. KEF was founded in the UK by Raymond Cook, who used to be a BBC electrical engineer. The name KEF stands for Kent Engineering and Foundry. In their first decade, they had already developed a couple of nice-sounding hi-fi speakers, as well as a tweeter and bass driver, which would become the basis for the LS3/5 studio monitor, the T27 and the B110 respectively. And those two drivers would continue to serve in studio monitors all the way through to the early 2000s. Now, critical for our tale is the fact that KEF was a UK company that primarily manufactured their stuff in Maidstone, Kent. And that statement has a small asterisk, which I will get to in a minute. Just for reference, the term monitor is usually used to refer to a speaker that you would use in a professional recording setting like a studio because it has a relatively flat frequency response and doesn't emphasize or diminish any sound frequencies. In other words, it doesn't color the sound or add character to it like most home speakers do. That's really helpful when you're a sound engineer, but it may not be as interesting to listen to at home, although I'd argue that's just a matter of taste. Now, all of that brings me to this interesting pair of vintage Crestas. These speakers contain the very same B110 bass driver and T27 tweeter that are found in the studio monitors that I mentioned earlier. The only difference is the internal crossover. While the LS3/5A has a crossover that looks like it could remember your first name and social security number, this one is notably less complicated, having only a single 4-ohm capacitor and 2 inductors. When I bought these, I actually got to find out a little bit about their origins from the original owner. Well, his son. Anyway, and it made a lot of the things we're going to look at make more sense because, as you'll see, there's some weirdness going on. This is a pair of first-generation KEF Cresta speakers. Sort of. They're a two-way bookshelf speaker system, which means they have a separate driver for the bass and treble. The cases are made from pressboard with this beautiful veneer over the top. I love the golden color, and I really like the little groove that they cut into it. It gives them a little bit of extra mid-century styling. They used a brown and tan synthetic material for the grill cloth, which is still in great condition, and it feels like the same stuff that they made AstroTurf out of. Next to that is this nice wood strip that carries the KEF badge. If I pop the grill off, you can see the 4-inch bass driver and the 1-inch tweeter. They've cut the case to allow the speakers to be recessed into the fiberboard. On either side of the speakers, you can see a pair of ball catches that hold the grill in place, which they've also mounted in a routed out slot on the fiberboard. On the grill are 2 little brass tabs which key into those catches. They're really solid, they hold the grills on really securely, and feel very satisfying when you remove or replace them. Now, if any of you are familiar with the first generation Cresta speaker, you probably have noticed something amiss. Well, quite a few things, actually. But for starters, the whole front grille is different than usual. The Crestas like this that were made in England in 1967 had a cloth grille, and only the cloth section came off when it was removed. This strip of wood on the side stayed put. Also, that grille was held on with little Velcro pads rather than these fancy latches. So what's going on here? Well, this pair of speakers was not made in the KEF factory in Kent. These were made in Hong Kong by a company called the Radio People Limited. However, while that should immediately send up a red flag to most people, in this particular case, these are not counterfeits. They're made under license from KEF using all authentic parts, which they would import and assemble. So the drivers, the crossovers, and the badges are all from KEF in England. Only the wood case and the grill are made in Hong Kong, and they made them to their own high-quality standards. So why would they do that? Well, there were a vast number of reasons, but the one that applies to our particular story is the large number of US soldiers who were stationed in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. A lot of the guys there liked to buy nice stereo equipment and have it shipped back home so that they could use it after their deployment, and having it built right there in Hong Kong allowed them to avoid import taxes. And if they carried it home themselves, they could avoid shipping costs as well. It was pretty common. And in fact, a lot of the speakers that I found here in Palm Springs were originally bought in a similar way. If we flip them around, the backs are also different from the UK versions. First of all, These are painted kind of a bluish gray color compared to the stony gray backs of the Kent-built ones, but the biggest glaring difference is the wire terminals. The originals had a piece of phenolic paper with little flathead screws where the wire was attached, and that was just sitting flat on the back of the wood box. These have a pair of thumb screws which are actually recessed into the case with a nice rounded edge. Above them is the Radio People Limited badge. Now, I realize they're not the same as the original ones from England, but these are in no way inferior, at least when it comes to construction. In fact, I actually prefer the brass latches and thumb screws. I know if you're a collector, you probably want the original versions, but I don't feel like I'm missing out by having these. The only thing I can't say is whether these sound the same as their English counterparts because I've never heard them side by side. I'll tell you, I did end up having to recap these. The highs were way too quiet on this one here on the right. This is the original capacitor. You can see it's a little bit out of spec. But since we're talking about the crossover, let's open one of these up and look at the insides. The bottom speaker is the B110. It came in more than one version, and in fact, there are still companies making variants of it now. This is the SP1003. If you need to replace these for some reason, make sure you get the correct version for your speakers. Or if you can't, at least try to get two and make them match. Sometimes the driver will have the number somewhere on the basket or on the magnet, but unfortunately, these don't. If you don't match them, they might sound a little odd. Most speaker engineers design the whole package to work together, and if you swap something out that wasn't part of the original spec, it can alter the acoustic profile of your speakers. It doesn't always, and that's not to say it won't work regardless, and it doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, you might even like the change more. That's up to you. I'm just saying it might not sound original anymore. Just something to keep in mind if that matters to you. Let's pull the tweeter out too. If we look on the back, you can see that they've printed all the text in metallic gold on the back of a piece of acrylic. What surprises me so much about these are those little details that nobody would ever see. Most of the T27 tweeters that I see online have just a basic black label on them or silver printing rather than gold. Since I have the grill off, let me show you something else. This badge doesn't match the original 1967 Cresta badge. The color is different and the shape of the oval is a little bit more pointy. But that does match the KEF badge for their Concorde model, which came out only a year or so later. I don't know if these badges were used on any models prior to the Concorde. If you're aware of any, please let me know in the comments. With the drivers removed, you can see the insulation on the inside. Fortunately, this is cotton, so I don't need any PPE. And the crossover board is attached with these two brass screws. Once they're out, you can just pull it out a little bit. I'd take it out entirely, but that would require desoldering the wires, and I'd rather not do that. But there's the two inductors and the new capacitor, which was only a couple of dollars on Parts Express. Remember, recapping is easy and definitely worth the time and effort. On the bottom of the board, you can see that they even have the KEF logo. Now, getting the board back in place is admittedly a little frustrating because you have to line up the screw holes by braille, and having big hands doesn't exactly help either. I haven't found a specific trick for starting the screws except for just fiddling with them. If you have any tricks to this kind of thing, I welcome the suggestion. Okay, so by now I'm sure you know how to hook speakers up, but if this is your first time with this kind of stuff, you just need an amplifier and some speaker wire. Just cut the wire to length, expose the ends, and screw the exposed ends onto the speaker. The thumb screws will just clamp the wires in place. Then just make sure the wire that's attached to the red screw goes to the red terminal on your amp and vice versa. That'll be positive, the black one will be negative. Usually the speaker wire will have an indicator of some kind printed on it that'll make that easier. So how do they sound? Well, since my mic setup is still severely lacking, I can't show you, but if I have to describe them, I'd say clear and balanced and bassier than I would have expected. These don't really need a subwoofer. I tried a lot of music through them and I didn't find anything that sounded better or worse, oddly. Everything from classical to hip hop sounded fine. And I was impressed that they were able to handle really heavy metal without sounding muddy, which is more than I can say for a lot of other speakers that I've tried. That's usually my biggest metric, so I feel like I scored with these. I just ordered some parts for the pair of Bang & Olufsen speakers that I was going to do for this video, so that's going to be the next one. Parts Express, of course, though I do need to check out Mouser Electronics because some of you in the comments have recommended them as well. But yeah, I think that about covers these. Before I go, I just want to reiterate something. This hobby is about having fun and hunting for neat pieces of equipment. As long as you enjoy listening to your stereo, it shouldn't matter what brand it is, how cheap or expensive it is, or what it looks like. The only audience that matters is you, because you're the one listening to it. So go out, keep thrifting, and as always, stay metal.